3. He has an impure heart who regards iniquity in his heart. If I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. Psalm 66, verse 18. In the original it is, if I look upon sin, that is, with a lustful look. Sin regarding is inconsistent with heart purity. What is it to regard iniquity? A. We regard iniquity when we indulge in sin. When sin not only lives in us, but when we live in sin. Some will leave all their sins but one. Jacob would let all his sons go but Benjamin. Satan can hold a man by one sin. The fowler holds the bird fast enough by one claw. Others hide their sins, like one who shuts up his shop windows, but follows his trade within the doors. Many deal with their sins as Moses' mother dealt with her son. She hid him in the ark of bulrushes, as if she had left him, but her eye was still upon him, and in the end she became his nurse. Exodus 2, verse 9. Just so, many seem to leave their sins, but they only hide them from the eyes of others. Their heart still goes after them, and at last they nurse and give breast to their sins. B. To regard iniquity is to delight in iniquity. Though a child of God sins, yet he does not take a delight in sin. I do the very thing I hate. Romans 7, verse 15. But impure souls make a recreation of sin. They delight in wickedness. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 12. Never did one feed with more delight on a meal he loves than a wicked man does upon the forbidden fruit. This delight in sin shows that the will is in the sin, and the will is the rule and measure of the deed. C. To regard iniquity is to make provision for sin. Make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. Romans 13, verse 14. The wicked are caterers for their lusts. It is a metaphor taken from such as make provision for a family to feed them. The Greek word here signifies a projecting and planning in the mind, how to bring a thing about. This is to make provision for the flesh, when one studies to satisfy the flesh and provide fuel for lust. Thus Amnon made provision for the flesh, 2 Samuel 13, verse 5. He pretends himself to be sick, and his sister Tamar must be his nurse. She must cook and serve his food to him, by which means he defiled her virginity. It is sad when men's concern is not to be holy, but to satisfy lust. D. To regard iniquity is to give it respect and entertainment. As Lot showed respect to the angels, he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I beg you. Genesis 19, verse 2. When the Spirit of God comes, he is repulsed and grieved. But when temptation comes, the sinner bows to it, sets open the gates, and says, Turn in here, my Lord. This is to regard iniquity. E. He is said to regard sin who does not regard the threatenings of God against sin. We read of 7 thunders uttering their voices, Revelation 10, verse 3. How many thunders in Scripture utter their voice against sin? Surely God will crush the heads of his enemies, the hairy crowns of those who go on in their sins. Psalm 68, verse 21. Here is a thundering Scripture, but sinners fear not this thunder. Let a minister come as Boanerges, clothed with the spirit of Elijah, and denounce all the curses of God against men's sins. They have no regard for it. They can laugh at the shaking of a spear. Job 41, verse 29. This is to regard iniquity, and argues an impure heart. 4. An unbelieving heart is an impure heart. The Scripture calls it expressly an evil heart of unbelief. Hebrews 3, verse 12. An unbelieving heart is evil in the highest degree. It is full of the poison of hell. Unbelief is the foul medley of all sins, the root and receptacle of sin. A. Unbelief is a God-affronting sin. It puts the lie upon God. It calls in question His power. Psalm 78, verse 19. Mercy and truth. The one who does not believe God is actually calling God a liar. 1 John 5, verse 10. Can a greater affront be cast upon the God of glory? It makes us trust to second causes, which is setting the creature in the place of God. Asa, in his disease, sought not to the Lord, but to the physicians. 2 Chronicles 16, verse 12. He relied more on the physicians than upon God. Saul seeks to the witch of Endor. O high affront, to lean upon the reed and neglect the rock of ages. B. Unbelief hardens the heart. These two sins are linked together. He upbraided them with their unbelief and hardness of heart. Mark 16, verse 14. Unbelief breeds the stone of the heart. He who does not believe God's threatenings will never fear Him. He who does not believe God's promises will never love Him. What is said of the Leviathan is true of the unbeliever. Its heart is as hard as rock, as hard as a millstone. Job 41, verse 24. Unbelief first pollutes the heart and then hardens it. C. Unbelief breeds hypocrisy. Professors do not believe that God is a jealous God and will call them to account. Therefore it is they who put on a mask of religion and are saints in jest, that they may play the devil in earnest. 2 Timothy 3, verses 4 and 5. They pretend to worship God, but self is the idol they worship. Like rowers, they look one way and row another. The unbeliever is the greatest hypocrite. D. Unbelief causes the fear of men. Fear is the proof of a base-born soul. Fear is a debasing thing. It unmans a man. It makes him afraid to be godly. The fearful man studies rather compliance than conscience. The fear of man brings a snare. Proverbs 29, verse 25. What made Abraham equivocate, David pretend to be mad, and Peter deny Christ? Was it not their fear? And whence does fear spring but from unbelief? Therefore the Scripture joins them together, the fearful and unbelieving. Revelation 21, verse 8. E. Unbelief is the root of apostasy, an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Hebrews 3, verse 12. What is the reason those who seemed once zealous now despise God and leave off prayer in their families? Is it not their unbelief? They believed not that God is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Hebrews 11, verse 6. Infidelity is the cause of apostasy. Unbelief leads to apostasy. And if unbelief is the breeder and fomenter of so much sin, then the unbelieving heart must needs be an impure heart. 5. A covetous heart is an impure heart. The earth is the most impure element. The purity of the heart lies in the spirituality of it, and what is more opposite to spiritualness than earthiness? Covetousness is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6, verse 10. To what cost do you drive mortal hearts in your accursed lust for gold? A. Covetousness is the root of discontent. Why do any repine at their condition, but because they think they do not have enough? The Greek word for covetousness signifies an immoderate desire of getting. Because the covetous man is never satisfied, his heart frets in discontent and impatience. B. Covetousness is the root of theft. Achan's covetous heart made him steal that wedge of gold, which served to cleave asunder his soul from God. Joshua 7, verse 21.